Next up, we are thrilled to be joined by Anna Makanju, Vice President of Global Affairs at OpenAI, in a conversation with Rama Elluru, Senior Director for Society at SCSP. Rama, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Anna, thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
OpenAI brought the world's attention to large language models. Since the release of chat last November, AI has generated tremendous excitement, but also concern. So much so, as we heard earlier today, that Senate Leader Schumer held an all-day forum on that very topic just last week. Anna was in that room. She's here with us today to talk about how this technology is reshaping our world and how we must in turn shape it. Anna, large language models rock the world, both societies and governments alike. What should this crowd know about generative AI capabilities? And what excites you the most with respect to the positive implications this technology will have on society?
So I think generative AI as a term is a little bit limited because I think especially for people in this room, one of the incredibly useful aspects of this technology is that it's able to analyze immense amounts of information and classify that information, whether that's code or data or text or images. And so it gives you the ability to do much more complex tasks than you otherwise would, but you can do this in natural language, which means there's essentially no barrier to anyone engaging with this technology. So the thing that I think is so exciting about that is that it's an incredibly equalizing force because it really brings down the cost of cognition, the cost of intelligence. And so it's going to accelerate the access to services that are usually incredibly expensive, like law, like medicine. And some of the applications I've seen that are really incredible, for example, in India, there's an application where through WhatsApp, farmers can actually access invoice information about government services and also receive a response in voice. This is using our models. And obviously, this also means that literacy is not specifically a barrier. So that's really the exciting thing, is that there is such a low barrier to engaging with these tools.
Thank you. So you've worked at the White House and various government leaders on policy development, and now you're leading global affairs at OpenAI. How do you contrast the way policymaking happens with respect to AI in comparison to other issues?
I think that especially having worked in government in the Obama administration, it's been incredible to see how collaborative it has been from the very beginning. So the technology is so incredibly complex that it's essential to have an approach where we are working together. None of us know exactly what the right approach is to make sure that this technology is safe and beneficial. But especially, OpenAI was founded with that as a goal. We're actually governed by a nonprofit with this mission to make sure that the technology benefits humanity. So making sure that it's safe and broadly beneficial is actually the only thing that we're working towards. And so making sure that we're able to be in that conversation with policymakers and consider the incredibly wide ways that this is going to impact all of us together has been, super critical.
OpenAI has joined other top AI companies in launching the Frontier Model Forum, focused on safe and responsible AI development. How do you envision this forum interacting with policymakers and other stakeholders? And perhaps start with an explanation, please, of what the purpose of the forum is.
Sure. The purpose is to make sure that we have the best thinking from the industry around what it actually means to make sure these models are safe. And this is more complex than it sounds because right now we don't even have a common language to talk about this. We say the same words without meaning the same thing. There's not specific measurements around what good red teaming looks like. So we really want to make sure that we're bringing our best technical expertise to the table here. And that's the purpose of this forum. We want to, and actually governments have asked us to do this. Basically, can we, the companies that are actually at the cutting edge of this technology, have a baseline in terms of what the best practices actually are here. Obviously, we want to make sure that civil society and governments are very closely engaged in that process, that we're not seen as grading our own homework. But without having our best technical experts work on this, I'm not sure we can actually get to a place where we really understand the right safety baseline for the technology.
So in light of companies making voluntary commitments, where do you think regulation is needed? And how should policymakers prioritize these needs?
So we have a really incredible start with these voluntary commitments that we've agreed to, and that just recently the Biden administration announced a whole range of additional companies. And I think this is probably there is some regulatory hardening of some of those commitments that is necessary, but really we also need the work that's happening at the G7 and globally, because it's really important to internationalize and have a global conversation with as many people at the table as possible, given the way that this technology is going to have a profound impact all over the world.
Around the same time that OpenAI released its proprietary LLM, we started seeing open source models like Falcon from the UAE. How do you envision the generative AI ecosystem looking like in 5 years? And how do both proprietary and open source models exist together in the marketplace?
I feel like it's hard to even imagine how different things will be in 5 years. And part of that, of course, is that there will be more powerful models with capabilities that some which we can predict, some which we probably aren't even imagining today. But one thing, I was just looking at some studies about how most Americans now have heard of ChatGPT, but still the overwhelming majority of them have never used it. And this is just the US. So I think it was something like 10% of US adults have ever interacted with it. So one, a lot more people will have used this technology. It's going to be incorporated into all kinds of applications. And also we're going to have models interacting with other models. So just sort of like the change is going to come both from the integration of this technology into society and from the capabilities that will be increasing. But I was actually just talking to a friend recently who's at the financial services firm, and he's like, well, your models are too expensive for something, so if we use open source for certain parts of this, and then we use yours, and so they actually are using like 3 or 4 of these models already, including ours, in their workflow. And I can imagine that this is also something that's going to happen, which is that you're going to have, even in the same sort of company or workflow, the incorporation of multiple models.
Interesting. So many of the harms that the world worries about cross borders. So how do we, as the United States, work with our partners and allies in addressing these risks?
This is, what's really encouraging here is that this is already happening quite a bit. So the United States has brought a lot of other countries into the conversation on the voluntary commitments. I was just at the UN General Assembly, and it was really interesting to see how many leaders and senior officials from other countries were talking about the voluntary commitments on AI. And Sam and I went on this completely insane trip earlier this year where we visited 22 countries, and I think,
Wow.
a little over 30 days. And I think what was really remarkable is how consistent what we were hearing was across the board, whether it was in Indonesia, in India, or in France. Everybody is really, leaders are really excited about ensuring that they can seize the economic benefits that they know this technology will bring, and of course, establish these guardrails. And there is so much willingness to ensure that that conversation is global, that I actually feel more optimistic than I do on a lot of other issues, that we're going to be able to do this in a collaborative way with a lot of these countries at the table.
In your view, do you think it's realistic for broader international cooperation that includes both the United States and the People's Republic of China?
The way that I've thought about this is that on catastrophic risk, I really believe that we will be able to work together, because there's a recognition, and we've seen this, and we've seen actually direct statements from Chinese officials that they are very concerned about that aspect of this technology. I'm not saying that it's going to be something that's easy to do, but we've been able to collaborate in the past with adversaries on these kinds of on technologies that can have an impact that is this significant. And I do believe that we will be able to do this here as well.
Thank you. I think we have a few minutes for questions from the audience. Is that okay? So let's open it up to audience questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a mic runner will come to you. There in the back.
Thanks. I had a question about your view on the difference between principles and sort of regulation. That came up. I moderated a panel earlier today, and one of the points that the Minister of Innovation from the UAE spoke about principles and regulation. And so how do you see the two and the differences?
Well, I mean, I think the principles are just important to inform regulation. And what we're doing with the Frontier Model Forum is best practices. So I'm not sure about these different terminologies, but because the technology is evolving so quickly, there may be things that are very difficult to capture with hard regulation. So I think this is just another layer where if we know what principles we're trying to achieve, we are also able to implement areas that are vague in regulation according to those principles.
Any other questions from the audience? She's coming.
Hello, yes, I have a question. How do you compare ChatGPT 4 versus Bing Chat from Microsoft? The reason I'm asking is because I see big difference. ChatGPT is more like you put a prompt and it gives you a lot of text. And in the other one is more like a research. Like you ask questions, you get research, you get references. It seems to me that is more like a sophisticated. Can you tell me the difference?
So they're both operating on the same underlying technology. And actually, I believe this is back, but if not, it will be in a day or two. But we actually have the same capability, browse, within ChatGPT. So you will be, versus baseline ChatGPT, you're just getting answers based on just the model itself. Whereas with Bing Chat or with Browse, although they are different still, you can actually get it to search for that information and provide you an answer. But both companies, we're separate companies and we build separate products. So of course, in terms of our reinforcement learning from human feedback that is continually ongoing with ChatGPT, that may be a reason that you will get some variations. The style will be varied, but you can do the same thing essentially with ChatGPT.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about, let's say there are regulations around safety and security and trust, et cetera, right? Do you see that being a competitive advantage there's more pressure to not share and collaborate with other model creators, for example?
Yeah, could you just repeat that question? I'm not sure I understood it exactly.
So do you see trustworthiness, because I'm focused on trustworthy, so I'm bringing out trustworthy, which is principles such as security, privacy, transparency, etc. If these are regulated and are expectations from your particular company and others, it's a very difficult problem to solve and will require some collaboration with other model makers. Do you see an impediment to that because it would be a competitive advantage to not perhaps collaborate?
So I work a lot with our most fierce competitors, and the Frontier Model Forum is actually comprised of Anthropic, Microsoft, OpenAI, and Google. And all of us are really closely aligned on safety interventions. First of all, I think that's partially self-serving because what we found is that products that incorporate trustworthiness and safety are actually more useful and are more popular with users. So we are incentivized in any event to make products that incorporate these principles, but also the industry itself needs to ensure that we have the trust of our users. Because if not, that's actually something that's going to be problematic for all of us. Right now, I'm sure everyone has seen the polls that people have a lot of anxiety about artificial intelligence generally. So there are many ways to collaborate without sharing information that is proprietary somehow. And we often do have our antitrust lawyers in the room when we're together to make sure that it doesn't get into anything that is competitive. But that still leaves a lot of issues that we can discuss and make progress on.
We have time for one more question.
Is this working? Yeah. Hey, Anna, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Quick question for you. When you saw for the first time GPT-4, what was your reaction?
So even before that, because I am not someone who had a lot of experience with large language models, but and also I went to law school and I spent 5 years working as a lawyer. And the first time I even saw GPT-3, I was like, oh my God, thank God I'm not a lawyer anymore. Lawyers are done. But I think that I've really, I have recalibrated my views there because, back when I was in law school, I remember asking someone who had been in law for many years, what did you guys do before like LexisNexis and Westlaw? And he was like, we had a life. Because back then you could go to a book, you could look up a case, you could cite the case, and you're like, okay, I'm all done. But with Lexis and Westlaw, you're expected to cite every case that has ever been written on that issue of law in the history of time. So I think what is happening is that what you're expected to deliver was, the quality of product is just going to go up. So unfortunately, I think lawyers are just going to have even more work, not less. And so, yeah, but being in government for 8 years, I was like, God, I wish I had this, including on the high side, because the ability to surface insights from massive amounts of information is so incredibly useful. GPT-4, I mean, it was a huge leap across the board in so many of these capabilities. Honestly, I really think that this was part of the reason that the massive success of ChatGPT was a bit of a surprise, because internally we had already had GPT-4 and we were using it. And so we're like, yeah, ChatGPT is fine, but it's like not as good as GPT-4. So I'm sure people will like it, but not that much. So I think we're just poorly calibrated, because I think with all technology, there is this thing where the first time you see it, you're like, oh my God, this is magic. And I think this is happening with ChatGPT, where people are like, this is unbelievable. I can't believe it can do this. And now people are just like, well, it's not really that great in these 10 aspects. So people get very quickly accustomed to it.
One more? Sure.
Oh. Hello, I'm interested in ChatGPT and intellectual property. So when I ask AI, maybe combined with DALL-E 3 now, to make me a portrait in the style of Picasso's Blue Period, is that infringing upon Picasso's copyright or ChatGPT's copyright, or is that my own personal artistic product? Who should get the intellectual property validation for the work that is made in collaboration with these models?
This is such a great question, although it's actually two questions, because one question is about the style, artists and what compensation they should get from images that might be in their models or might be referenced by their models. And then separately, what should be the approach for art or outputs of these models? And I think both questions are, there's currently more a better legal answer to the first question, although it is obviously being discussed quite a bit, than the second one, where a lot of artists, when I use DALL-E, no matter how good my prompt is, I can't get it to generate the kinds of things that I see artists generate when they use DALL-E. It's like a night and day. It's really quite remarkable. And so there are quite a few artists that come to us and say that, they're quite troubled by the fact that this conversation doesn't take into account what their contribution is to the generation of these images. But on the first question, one thing we've actually done with DALL-E 3 is to make sure that it doesn't generate outputs of works in the style of living artists. Now, some artists may want that, so we do give them the option of contacting us and say, hey, no, actually, I want people to be doing this, or vice versa, if they're not included in our list of artists, then they can add themselves to the list, and we will not generate images in their style. So this is a really evolving a question, and so our approach has to evolve, but we really want to make sure that creators are part of this conversation and part of this process, and that they feel like they can leverage and benefit these tools rather than be harmed by them.
Anyone else? In the back.
Hi, I'm a student at Penn currently, interested in cooperative AI, and I was quite interested when you brought up the interactions between different models. I'm possibly thinking of things like interactions between models that you put out, that competitors put out, and what OpenAI's plan is for, I guess, like managing the interactions in a positive way, whether they're going to be regulated differently, whether they're going to be like, I guess like moderated differently. Just curious.
The interactions between models, you mean?
Yes, interactions between models.
It's an interesting question. I mean, right now we have use case guidelines that prevent certain applications of the models or certain kind of data being put in or being produced by the models. And so that would apply for, I think, the models' interactions with the other models as well. But it's a really good point that I think that is not really an area of focus for current regulation, is the model-to-model interaction, because it's, of course, the user-to-model interaction or the construction of the model itself, what kinds of testing should happen on the model. I resent you for opening up a new area of regulatory thinking that I need to engage in more.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. So my question is that generative AI has like rapidly grown, and we're seeing several applications being implemented, whether it's e-commerce or like entertainment. So from a more business perspective, I was wondering what, as per you, in the next few years, is an area of application with the highest potential value and the least potential risk?
This is such an interesting question, because at OpenAI, our approach really is to be the intelligence layer. So we have this, we have one application, ChatGPT, but overall, we want to be sort of the layer that people build on. And right now, what we work with our developers to make sure they're abiding by our use case guidelines, but for the most part, we are not overseeing like what we want to, and we have a fund and other ways that we work with people to encourage the use cases of the models that we want to see. For now, I think the areas of really high risk are where there are automated decision making by these models in areas that are really relevant to ensuring that people get access to resources. And so we prohibit most of the use cases. So you can't have an application without a human in the loop making determinations about hiring or providing financial assistance. And so that seems pretty high risk. But overwhelmingly, the ways that people use these models are kind of in their daily lives to assist them. So they're relatively low risk. And use even in high risk areas. For example, one of my very favorite examples is the Trevor Project. They built an automated, basically an automated avatar for their suicide prevention counselors to train with. So it's a high risk area because mental health, but it's not a direct interaction with the artificial intelligence. So they found a way to minimize the risk. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
We're out of time. Anna, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your insights. Please help me show our gratitude. Thank you.